Storing your logs online in a useful manner can be tricky. There are many different services out there with different options. One service that I have found useful, especially since I like to use Serilog as my logging system, is Elma.io. Elma.io is an online log storage and management system that works really well with .NET. It quickly gives you clarity into what is happening with your applications, and it can even help you capture unhandled exceptions, 404 errors, and more, so that you have a clear picture of what is happening with your deployed application. In this video, we're going to look at how to get started with Elma.io and how to configure our application to send data to this service quickly and easily. Now, to be clear, Elma.io is a paid service. There is a free trial period, I believe it's 21 days. And no, this is not a sponsored video. This is just, I found a great tool and I think you should know about it too. So before we dive in, I want to share a few things with you. First, if you're interested in improving your C# skills, be sure to subscribe to this channel. With over 700 C# videos and counting, it's the perfect place to learn and grow your skills. Second, if you're looking for free C# resources, head on over to iamtimcorey.com and check out the resources tab. You'll find my podcast, C# projects page, and much more. And third, if you're ready to dive deeper into a specific C# topic, I have a variety of courses that can help. Not only will you receive a world-class education, but you'll also help fund my free content so that everyone can have a great education in C#, not just those who can afford it. So let's dive in here to what is Elma.io. Now, to be clear, there is a tool in .NET called Elma. This is not associated with Elma. This is Elma.io. They started with logging from Elma into this service. So that's why the names are similar. But this right here, just go to Elma.io and you'll see basically all you need to know to get started. How it works, including the fact that not only does it have error monitoring, but it also has uptime monitoring. It can track your health checks. It can do deployment tracking, heartbeats, and more. So lots of cool stuff here. If you go to pricing, yes, there's a free trial, 21 days, again, I believe is what it is. And if you get started, well, $17 a month for one user, unlimited applications, and 1,000 messages per month. More likely you're going to be in the, small business to business category if you're doing anything in production with a real application. And again, one of the things I hear pushback a lot from developers is, well, I want it to be free. Well, you can't have it for free. And the reason why is because these things do take money. And if your application is a production application, then it's in some way making your business money. Even if it's supporting your current business, that's in some way making your business money. And so you should use tools that have a support system. That way they don't go away. Because this is actually, when I look at my business and look at things that I want to use paid products and I want to pay for them. And the reason why is because if I'm paying for them, it's more likely that they'll be able to keep going and keep growing and keep expanding. And unlike an open source project where they might decide I'm done and they have no incentive not to be done. And they have no incentive to pass that on to somebody else. Even though they often do, it's a more shaky proposition. This way, when they have a monetization outlet, you know that they have at least some foundation of a way to keep the business growing and keep improvements and even hire people and build up what they're doing. So this is a really important thing for me as a valuable thing, not a negative. Okay, but again, you can start the free trial right up here and get going. When you do, you'll get something like this. Now, I did talk to the owner of Elma, and no, this is not a sponsored video, but I said, hey, I'm looking to show this off. Would you mind opening up a few things for me? And he was very, very gracious and opened up a few things. We can kind of demo the different things that might be in a higher profile. For example, there is uptime checks and there's heartbeats, and we'll see what those are and how they work in this demo. So just note that some of the things I show off, and I'll kind of point them out, but some of the things I show off are in the business or business plus category. But the root of what we're going to talk about, the majority of what we're going to talk about is all in the startup category. So There's lots of stuff in startup that you can do. Personally, once you get started in the application, I would say move to the small business category. It's not a huge jump. It's $9 more per month, and you get 30 days of retention instead of 7. That's kind of important. So with that, let's talk about this dashboard. Now, I've already set up a new project, but you can create a log right here. You can have different logs for different systems if you want. You can create log, you give it a name, you decide what color you want it to be, and you decide what emails you want to get. So you want the daily digest email, which summarizes the logs in the last 24 hours. When you get new errors, then you can get an email. When you have a heartbeat change, you'll get an email, and impacted increase. So when you have, maybe you're logging normally, 50 errors an hour, which hopefully you have 0, but let's just say that's your normal pattern is 50 errors an hour, and all of a sudden you have 1,500. Well, that would say, hey, there's an increase here, something's going on, check this out. So really helpful emails. If you want those, you can turn them all off if you want. For example, I did that. So that's right here. There we go. So I turn them all off because I didn't need it for this demo. And also you can choose the name and what kind of category is this? Because maybe you want to have one for demos, one for for staging, one for production. So you can have different log systems. That way you don't get confused and say, wait, was that error from production or was it from development? That's a big difference. Okay, and I briefly show you this. This is a little gear icon here. Once you create this, in this case, I call it demo, you get this option right here where there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can configure your application. So this tells you how to do it, including giving you the API key and the log ID. Now, yes, I'm going to recycle this because I'm going to keep this for you to log to my logger. Not to be a huge deal, but I'm going to turn this off after this demo. So don't worry about me showing this off. But what this does is it allows you to get started very, very quick. The documentation in this system is great. There's great documentation. I'm not going to show off Serilog today, even though Serilog is my favorite logger right now. But you click on Serilog and it shows you here's how to install a package, here's how to configure Serilog, and here's how to log to it, which is already what you probably have in place for logging. So it gives you all the information you need to get started and to start writing to this Elma.io from your Serilog. Now, today we're going to do Blazor. So we're going to follow a similar pattern to this, but we're going to talk through the different parts of this and kind of go beyond just this, okay? And again, there's JavaScript, there's Azure Functions, there's web forms, so you're back to web form days. Like there's a lot of different options here. There's ways of doing it in the documentation that would, if these are not one of the options you're using. But again, this is very C# focused primarily, even though it has JavaScript. Okay, let's dive in a demo. And right now we have, yay, no errors, which is awesome. We have no errors in our system, also no logs at all. So let's change that we're going to go over to Visual Studio and we're going to create a new project, Blazor web app. And inside of my practice location, we're going to call this logging demo. And we're not going to put in the same directory. So we're going to say logging demo app. We're going to do .NET 8, no authentication, yes to HTTPS. We're going to turn off the interactive render mode. So it's going to be none. Just because of simplicity of the project, it's cleaner this way. We're not going to do a lot in the project itself, just throw a couple exceptions and log a couple of messages. But I want to point that out there that if we turn on auto, it would create 2 projects. We're just going to create 1. And we are going to talk about this. The new project type has both WebAssembly and server. That adds some complexity because if you're dealing with the WebAssembly part, well, it can't talk directly to, say, a database or directly to certain things that Elma.io logs, which means that you have to use a different tool, a different NuGet package in order to log for both WebAssembly and server. And that's in the documentation, but we'll use the WebAssembly version just so you can see how to do that. We'll talk through that as we go. But we're going to choose none for our interactive render mode. Okay, yes to the sample pages and leave the other two unchecked. Okay, so here is our application. Our application should be fairly simple. Let's just make sure we can run it. It's always a good thing to do to start off with a running application. Make sure that it works, that it actually launches, and there you go, hello world. We're good to go. So, and there's the weather. Okay, so with that, now what we're going to do is we're going to start working on setting up Elma. Now, I'm going to do this in 2 phases because some of this is required for just logging unhandled exceptions, and some of this is required for logging. We're going to do it in 2 separate pieces. So we're going to do unhandled exceptions first. So right-click on your dependencies, at Manage NuGet Packages. We're going to go to Browse. We're going to search for elma.io.ASP.NET Core. Okay, and we're going to install the ASP.NET Core elma.io package. Okay, and the current one is 5.1.66. Whatever the version is that's most current is what you want. Okay, with that installed, I am going to go to my secrets.json, right-click on your project, and say Manage User Secrets. And in here, what I want to do is create a section called Elma.io. And then in here, I'm going to say API key, and I'll leave that blank for now. And we're going to say log ID, and we'll leave that blank. But remember, back over here on our, if we go back to the dashboard, we can come here to our log settings, and we need those 2 values. The key, we can copy that and paste that in here. And then we want our ID, copy that, and paste it in there. So those 2 things are what we're going to need to use in order to talk to Elma.io. So that's the connection. That's how it gets into your logger versus somebody else's logger. So that's in secrets.json. I've covered before the app settings that this is going to override app settings.json, but just note that that's what we're doing. And again, the way I typically do it is I go into app settings.json and I will put this value as well, but get rid of the actual values in these. So that way they're here. So they're here, but they're not filled with anything. That way we're sure that, when a person downloads this from a GitHub, that they know what keys and what, property names, all that kind of stuff, what they need, but they can take this, just copy it, and put it in their own secrets.json. Again, secrets.json is only for the local machine, the current machine you're on. That's it. After that, it relies on this. Okay. So with that, now we need to go into program.cs. We're going to add a using directive. So using elma.io.ASP.NET Core. So in here, what we're going to do is we're going to go down to our builder section right here. This is where we configure our dependency injection. So we're going to say builder.services.configure. We're going to say Elma IO options. And this is a kind of a shortcut that will help us pull the information from app settings or secrets.json and not have to specify it. So inside of here, we're going to say, let's just put our semicolon at the end first. Let's make sure it's a semicolon. There we go. And we're going to say builder.configuration.get section, and we're going to say Elma IO. Now, if you've watched my video, I believe it was last week, I covered what this is doing, but this right here is pulling from our configuration. So even though we're in the services setup, we can still pull from our configuration. Let's bring us on a separate line. We're still pulling from our configuration. We're pulling the entire section, Elma IO. which is our API key and our log ID. Okay, with that done, then what we're going to do is on the next line, we're going to say builder.services.add Elma.io. Now we could pass in here, we could say C arrow and then say C dot API key equals and C dot log ID equals, like so. We could do that and then pull the values in from builder.configuration. But because we did this line right here, this is a shortcut so that this right here will pull from this Elma options. And so we're going to pull that from dependency injection and say, oh, I've got that, and it will pull in the dependencies it needs. So it just makes things a little easier, a little shortcut. With that, now what we're going to do is we're going to come down here before the use HTTPS redirection. And we're going to say app.use Elma.io. This is where it actually enables Elma.io. Remember, this is just for capturing the unhandled exceptions of our application. Now, this has to happen before you start mapping components or doing other things that would involve the setup and the routing. You want to do this after any authentication. So there's a place for this in the hierarchy of our middleware. Okay, this is our middleware here. And yes, there is an order because it goes down from one to the next to the next to the next. And so you want to make sure you put things in the right order, and that's the order it needs to be in. Okay, so now we can do is we can come over to, we've configured Elma.io. We're done now, okay? So Elma.io will now capture unhandled exceptions. But let's prove that by going over here to our pages, going to the home page, and we're going to add a code section. Actually, let's first inject what we need. Inject, and we're going to inject the iLogger. Well, we don't need iLogger yet, so let's wait on iLogger and just create a code section. Sorry. Code, and then in here I am going to do a protected override void uninitialized. Okay, so uninitialized happens every time our page loads. And so I'm just going to put code in here. I could have put it on a button click and just click the button and had it happen, but this will happen as soon as the page loads. I'm going to say throw new exception. I messed up. Okay, so now we know it's our exception because the exception message will say, I messed up. And we can see what happens when we do that. Okay, so now let's save this. Let's go back to our Elma page and make sure that we have no errors on our page. Great, we don't. Let's run our application. And as soon as the home page is hit, it's going to say, hey, we've got an unhandled exception, but we're in debugging mode. So it pops up and says, what do you want to do? Well, we want to just continue. Hit continue. And when you do, you get this page here because we're in debug mode. We can see the actual exception and what's happening there. If you're in production mode, you wouldn't see that, but no worries, because now we can hit refresh here and we've got an issue. Okay, so actually got two issues, which is interesting. We only threw one unhandled exception. And that's what we captured, one critical, and that says I messed up. Okay, so we click on that and it says, okay, on Tim Corey dev PC, on the URL was localhost, the time, the type of exception was system.exception, the source was a logging demo, the client IP address was localhost in the US. But here is the detail of that exception. We can inspect more about it and see, what's going on in our application. All that information because of an unhandled exception, something we did not capture on our web application. It just crashed the application, but that's okay. We can still capture it here and know that it happened. But notice it says 2 total. And if you click that, we've got 2 different ones. We've got our system exception. We know about that. But then notice the code here, 404. Well, favicon.io. Click on that, and it says, hey, I couldn't find localhost/favicon.ico. So our application loaded and was trying to add this, but it couldn't find that in our project or our website, which is true. When you start up a test project for Blazor, it doesn't include a favicon icon. And because it doesn't, even though it asks for one, it throws a 404 in the background. You may not have even noticed it, but it does. So this captured that 404 and put it in here as well. So we know, oh, wait, you know what? We're missing a favicon because it's throwing this 404 every time a page loads. But there's even more here to look at. Also notice the affected browsers. This tells you how many browsers are affected. We can even kind of dial it in and say, well, what browsers, what things happen in Edge? Well, those are the things that happen in Edge. We can go back to the overview and say, well, what about Internet Explorer? We've got no errors for Internet Explorer. That's great, right? Or no one's using it. But this allows you to figure out what's going on, when it's going on, and be able to track down issues even though your application is deployed or in production. So that's the start. That's the unhandled exceptions, but we could also add handled exceptions or just logging in general into our dashboard. So let's do that now. So I'm going to come over here and I need to add something else to program.cs. So in program.cs, we have our configuration of our services. But in that services, we're also going to say builder.logging, because there is built-in logging in .NET, and it's designed to be overridden. It's designed to be used by other systems. It's an interface that logging systems can work with. That way, we can swap out from one to the other. So we can configure it today for just logging directly to elma.io. But tomorrow, if we decide we want to use Serilog, well, we just change out this configuration here, and now the same log messages now go to Serilog, or through Serilog to elma.io instead of through just elma.io directly. So builder.logging.add elma.io, which we have to add a using directive for this. Well, actually, we have to add a NuGet package first. That was my bad. So manage NuGet packages, and we're going to say we want elma.io, and then we have a couple options here. We have extensions.logging. That's an option, and that would work if you're using a Blazor server application or an MVC application or Razor Pages application or just a console application. Those are things you would use extensions.logging. But for us, we're using also potentially Blazor WebAssembly. So we're going to say blazor.wasm. And that gives us this package right here. This package will work on Blazor WebAssembly, but also work on Blazor server. And this allows us to use it for the new Blazor web application project type, which does both potentially. It does both server and WebAssembly. This way, our logging still works when it transitions from server over to WebAssembly. So they are working on a kind of combined package that would do both and be able to switch back and forth and all the rest. But this works. So we're going to install this package. Okay, so once that's installed, ignore the error messages. Once that's installed, what we can do is come up to our using directives and say using elma.io.blazor.wasm. Okay, and so then down here, now we've got this working, we can set up our, and let's just say options to be clear, and then we'll do our configuration in here. Now, this doesn't work the same way this one does. See that add Elma IO. Notice the slight difference. So builder.services.add Elma IO versus builder.logging.add Elma IO. They're different. This one down here is for logging. This one up here is for unhandled exceptions. They're different. So this one can't take in, or haven't figured out how to do it yet, but it can't take in this Elma IO options the same way, but no worry, because it gives us the opportunity to see how to set it up manually, which is to say options.api key equals, we'll set it up as blank for now, log ID equals like so, and then we're going to replace this right here with builder.configuration.getValue type string, and the value is going to be Elma IO : API key. We can unpin this for now, and that gives us our information, our API key for this option. We're going to do the same thing for log ID. So there's log ID, and that gives us the information we need. But there's an exception here, or an error here. We need to say new GUID and then wrap this whole thing from log ID. We can't just say new or just get value. It's going to warn us here there's a possible null exception, and that's true. Because if you don't have a value here, yes, that will throw an exception. There's a few different ways you can work through this. You could pass in an empty string or something like that, but I really want to crash the application, which means I'm actually going to say exclamation point, which says, no, this is going to be not null, which is not necessarily true. And I don't encourage you to use this to ignore the errors, but in this case, I do want to ignore the error because I want it to crash the application if it can't find the log ID, which is what will happen. So with that, we've got our application set up to add logging for Elma IO. Let's come back over here. We're going to comment out our exception, and we're going to inject. Now we're going to inject our iLogger of type home, which is this is the home page. We're going to say log. You don't need a semicolon there. And what we're going to do is we're going to say log. Let's do a log warning and say this is a warning. Let's get my right key here. And then we're going to say log critical. This is a critical message. And then log information. This is informative. Like so. So there's some logging going on now. When we run our application, we should see our warnings pop up, our information pop up for this. Okay, so the page loads. And if you go over here, this page loads. We're good to go. Notice, by the way, if we hit F12 and we bring up our developer tools, so they're kind of small. But if we come up to our console, we're not seeing that 404 error here, but we will see the logs. So now let's close this out and let's go back over to our logger. Let's bring it over here. I hit refresh, and we've got a whole bunch more log statements. So now we've got, more things to look at. So this is a warning, this is a critical message, and this is informative. So this is a critical message that tells us more information. Now, I didn't log much with this message, so it's just, that's the information, that's it. But if we come back over here and look, we can see this is a warning. There's your warning information. And we can start to chart this as well to say, oh, you know what? We've got a bunch of informative messages, which 6 of them, but I only logged 1, right? Well, actually, no, because if we go to just the informative messages and look, well, this is informative, that's mine, but then the content root path, the hosting environment, the application started, press Control-C to shut down, now listening on the HTTP port, now listening on the HTTPS port. Where did all that come from? That's from Microsoft. those are the things that Microsoft is logging, not things that I did directly. And if you go over here and look in your app settings.json, you'll see logging information. Well, that's logging the various things from Microsoft and it's configuring what can go and what won't go. For example, I could change this from the default value to be error, and then it wouldn't send any warnings or below unless we have an override like this. So we could send a whole bunch of information using information or above, or we can configure it to send less information if we want less information to come through. Just note that there's also the app settings.development.json that could override your settings. So if you made a change to app settings and said only error and above, well, you have to change it in the development.json to or instead if you want that to stick for in development. It's just one of those quirks because this allows us to have different settings for development than we do in production. Think of this as the default for production, whereas app settings.development.json is a default for development. That's why you have those two different settings. Okay, so that's how to configure. That's all there was really to configuring Elma.io in order to log your information, in order to give you this overview of what's going on in your application, to track the errors, track who's using it, track what's going on. Now, there's more to Elma.io than even that. For example, you can go ahead and set up deployment tracking. We're not going to do that in this video. There is an uptime. So I just tracked my devforge.com URL, and I've been tracking the uptime. I have 100% uptime. I click on this. It's checking multiple different locations, in this case, East and West US, and it's tracking somewhere in the United Kingdom South. And then it looks like Australia, Southeast, and the Northern Europe location. So 5 different locations every 5 minutes are pinging my server to make sure it's up. Also, once a day, it does a who is check to make sure that the information is accurate on my site, and it checks the certificate to make sure that the SSL certificate is active as well. This will warn you if your SSL certificate is about to expire or has expired. It will also warn you if your domain is going to be expiring soon to make sure that you renew your domain. So really helpful stuff there. We also have heartbeats. Now, I haven't set up heartbeats because that means setting up health checks. But what health checks are is you can say, hey, you know what? Maybe my website is running, but the database isn't available. And that means the site is technically available, but it's unhealthy because the site is reliant on that database. Or maybe the site is degraded because we depend on an email service that's down, but the rest of the stuff still works. So you can set up heartbeats to track those various things and those health checks. And then this heartbeat will check those. So you can say, hey, add a heartbeat. How long do you want it to be? And then it starts pinging your site and checking to make sure that those applications or services are up every so many, whatever the interval is, every 5 minutes, every 1 minute, every day, whatever it is. You can start checking those things to make sure that your site is not only up, but healthy. So not just pinging your site, but making sure your services are running properly as well. So lots of stuff in Elma.io that you can use. Again, this isn't a sponsored video. This is just, I found a great tool. I've been using this great tool. I like this great tool. And so I want to make sure that you saw it too. Again, this is a paid service. That's a good thing, not a bad thing, but it does mean that if you're just doing demos, you can try the 21-day trial and try it out. But this is more for if you're doing something in production where a paid service is okay, because this is relatively inexpensive for what you're doing and how much use you're going to get out of it. It's inexpensive compared to its competitors as well. So check it out, try it out. The documentation of this stuff is tremendous. So you go to documentation here. There's documentation for practically everything. So Serilog, okay, there's all the docs for how to set it up, how to work with ASP.core, how to decorate the log messages, how to remove sensitive data, how to troubleshoot issues, and so many other things. So if you want to work with other app integrations, logging something else, how the heartbeats or uptime monitoring works, this documentation is really great. There's lots here, so check it out. Again, elma.io is the tool, and that's how you use it. All right, thanks for watching, and as always, I am Tim Corey.